And welcome back to Coaching with the Bible. This is episode number 79, season 2, episode 25. The portion of the week is called Tzav, but today our focus is the Jewish holiday of Purim that came in this evening, celebrated tomorrow for most of the world, and continues into Friday for places like Jerusalem. It's one of those very interesting holidays on the calendar for our people, where you see a lot of levity, a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, a lot of joy, a lot of happiness, a lot of laughter. It's a very different kind of holiday. And we want to focus our coaching this week on an aspect of the story of Purim that comes out of the Book of Esther. And our focus this week is on being the quote-unquote right person. We'll unpack that in just a couple of moments. The story of Purim, the Book of Esther, is well known to all those who read the Old Testament, who know the story of Esther, who know the story of the people, who know about Haman, who know about the king, who know about Mordechai, and know how that story plays out. It's a fascinating story, the history of it, when it takes place, where it takes place, how it unfolds, and so on, is amazing. And it happens to be, and I've said this before, and people thought this was ridiculous, it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. And we say all the time here, my wife and I say that our favorite moment in the Bible, really, maybe our favorite verse in the Bible, is the moment in the interaction between Mordechai and Esther, where he implores her, he forces her, he commands her to take on the role to save her people. It's an amazing moment in the Bible, but it's not our focus exactly today. What do I mean by the idea of being the right person? What does that mean? And so on some level, it means meeting a moment, being the right person at the right moment in the right time. On some level, it means that. Some level, it means more to being prepared for a certain moment in a certain way. It also means not being the wrong person. And being the wrong person doesn't make a person wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean they're a failure. It just means that maybe the moment wasn't perfect because they weren't exactly the right person to be there. So let me sort of get out of that ambiguity and put a little clarity behind it. So I've been working in the company for a number of years called CauseMatch, and we do online fundraising. My role is coaching organizations and coaching leaders. And in the course of my work, it's been my responsibility or been sort of my interest to sort of pull apart the pieces of what makes the exchange work. We talked a little bit about it here in Coaching with the Bible on the idea of, how to ask or when to ask or what makes up an ask in the exchange of an ask for a donation or anything. And in putting all that work together and unpacking it and pulling the pieces apart, I came up with this idea called the 4 rights of asking. The 4 rights of asking, right is in quotes. What makes an ask right? What puts that into a place where it hits the stratosphere? It's the perfect situation. Everything hits. And so it's the 4 rights of asking. It's the right person making the right ask at the right time for the right amount, whatever that may be. And getting the mechanics of those 4 components correct puts a person in a position to do amazing, amazing things. And the first one, being the right person, is perhaps the most important. And it's often the one we most often overlook. And we just assume simply that just as long as somebody asks, then somebody will respond. And that's not always true. It's true that sometimes people will, but they're certainly not going to respond at the level that you want. And so let's unpack that in the context of the Bible, and let's unpack that in the context of life about being the right person. So in the Bible, it sort of works like this. Mordechai is in that story. He is operating, for the most part, behind the scenes. What I mean by that is, yes, he's sitting at the gates. He is some sort of a judge. He's an appointed official of some variety. He is known in the population. But when things start to happen, he needs to do things, other than not bowing down to the person known as Haman, everything else he seems to do is sort of behind the scenes. And so he speaks to Esther behind the scenes about not talking about who she is and where she comes from. When he saves the king from two advisors who are plotting to assassinate him, he doesn't do it directly, he does it indirectly. He goes through Esther to the king rather than going directly to the king. He's an operator, if you want to call it that, but he's really a facilitator to get things done. It's an amazing sort of perspective on him. In fact, as I was reading through the story and I was really trying to unpack him as a person, it's fascinating to see that he actually only speaks once in the entirety of the book. Now, we think he speaks more, but it's not true. In the other places, it sort of tells us what it is that he told other people, but it doesn't actually use his words. The only time it actually uses his words is when he's speaking to Esther in that moment, and he's demanding of her, commanding her to take on the role and the responsibility and to be accountable for saving her people. In that moment, in that place, Mordechai is the right person to make that request. He is not the right person to go to the king himself and make that request. It's an amazing sort of, you might call it a manipulation, but I would call it more an understanding of the circumstances, an understanding of the person where he or she is in the hierarchy, in the structure, and appreciating that they have no power, but they have influence, to use a term, and that his influence is towards Esther and no one else, and that he can get something done massively important by being the right person in that right moment. No one else could ask her to do that. And the reality of it is that no one else but Esther could go to the king and ask and do what she does. So being the right person isn't just sort of happenstance of us happening to be in a moment, but it's being in that moment and making that moment count for everything it's worth. And so it's interesting to see Mordechai operate and move pieces and play chess a little bit, but at the same time appreciate when he steps out and he steps forward is in that one particular moment. He is the right person in that moment. We talk about being the right person at the right moment. You hear it all the time. More often than not, we hear it in a place where we didn't expect that person to be the right person. But the reality of it is that person, in fact, is the right person. They have effectively what's necessary to make that situation succeed at its highest level. And so we show up in those moments, but more often than not, we shy away from those moments because we don't believe that we are the right person, or we don't believe that we deserve what's coming to us, or that we think it's always easier not to ask. It is always easier not to ask. But either way, if you ask and don't get it, and you don't ask, you also don't get it, either way, it's a failure. And so Mordechai appreciates his role, he appreciates the situation, and he sets it up and he manipulates, or he gets right what he needs to get right to get the people, to get Esther to do what she needs to do to save her people and his people. Sort of like a fascinating thing. So when I developed this concept, it was in a fundraising context, and it was based on my own experience, where I had sort of looked back and had to be honest that on many occasions I had not succeeded in getting the donation or the sized donation that I was expecting from a certain potential donor. Or getting something done from a teammate or a member, an employee, or whatever it was in certain moments, and wondering, well, why didn't that work? So sometimes, clearly, I didn't know what I was doing, and that's certainly true at the beginning. But even as I sort of began to understand what I was doing, I didn't appreciate the nuance of what exactly I was talking about until much later on I had a chance to look back on it. What I appreciate then is the idea that in certain moments with certain people, I was the wrong person. And unknowingly tested this out by bringing the right person to those situations. Here's an example. Many years ago, I was working at an institution as a fundraiser. I had gone to a certain potential high-capacity donor, made an ask, and it flopped dramatically. It happened more often than I'm willing to admit out loud, but I just did there. So this case with this one person, it flopped dramatically. I could not figure it out. It's like, well, that was like everything seemed to be right. It was, I don't know. So I tested it, and I brought someone along with me the next time to the same person who made the same ask and got the donation. And time and again, over and over and over again, I realized that in many of these situations, I was the wrong person. What I mean by that, in the wrong person, was that I didn't, say, represent the relationship in the highest way. So I didn't have the highest level relationship, the closeness, the intimacy, let's say, with that person to the degree by which I could be okay making such a financial request of them. I was not maybe in some cases the expert enough to be able to do that. I didn't necessarily understand all of the other things at play there, and therefore I was the wrong person. But when I brought these other people with me, they had long histories of relationship. They were high integrity people that the person knew for, years upon years. They had spent many hours and days and weeks and years together over the course of time. There's no question that I was the wrong person in those moments, and yet I'm making these asks irresponsibly. What I realized then that the role was more like a Mordechai role, was to facilitate the right person making the right asks. And amazingly, the success level went up. And in my work with organizations now and leaders now, this comes up all the time. All the time. And so I'll share with you just a brief vignette on it, and we'll come back and to understand the mix of how exactly it works. I met 5 or 6 months ago with an organization. I met with a leader who told me that he had consistently been reaching out to a certain group of his alumni, he was a school leader, to take on a certain role in a project that they were doing. He needed them to also raise a certain sum of money. And he was highly unsuccessful. I mean highly unsuccessful, like incredibly bad statistics. I'm listening to this presentation, and I knew immediately what was wrong. And trying my best not to offend, which sometimes for me is really, really hard, I said to him, please don't take offense, which basically means please be prepared to be offended. Please don't take offense at what I'm about to say, but you are the wrong person to do what you were doing, which explains your lack of success. Substitute you out with the right person, the head of the institution, the teacher that they know, a fellow alum, and your success rate's going to explode. That's exactly what happened. He facilitated what needed to get done. He explained it to the people who needed to do it. They then went and did it, and their success was dramatic. And so that's understanding that first key component of the 4 rights of asking is making sure that the right person is making that ask, is doing that task. And yes, in parentheses here for a moment, it certainly is the case sometimes that you get beginner's luck, dumb luck, some surprise that happens in a moment, and you're shocked by it, and there's a reason you're shocked by it because it shouldn't happen. Okay, so the statistics still, I think, bear out what I'm saying here. And so that's the case with Mordechai. That's the case with my experiences in fundraising. I'm sure it's the case with you and many things in your life as well, is appreciating when you were and when you weren't the right person to do something. And so what does that mean, being the right person? What's the analysis? What's the sort of the homework, the coaching element here is to look at those scenarios, whether it's task-related or interpersonally related, and think about the nature of the relationship that you have to either that task or to that person, and ask yourself, am I the best person in this spot? Do I have the best knowledge base? Do I have the closest relationship? Do I have the leverage factor? Do I have the character necessary? Do I have the experience necessary to get this accomplished at the highest level of success possible? If the answer to that is yes, then you are the right person. If the answer to that is no, then lean to your right, lean to your left, find the right person, put them in that seat, and make them Esther in that moment. Be Mordechai about it. Facilitate the success, get the right person into the right seats, get the success level at the highest level possible. That is this concept. That is being the right person. It is fundamental to every exchange and every ask and every relationship, business, transaction that you're going to be in, and you know it's true. Certain people call you, immediately you hang up the phone. Other people call you, you listen. Same exact ask. You get an email from a random organization or a random individual, you delete it. Has a name that you recognize, more likely to open it. Someone you actually know, the likelihood goes up. The right person. And so what it is in a religious context is the idea that personally, with relationship to God, God always seems to view you as the right person in those moments, whether you do or you don't. In the context of your personal life, it's building the relationships and then leveraging in the best way possible, in the most positive way of understanding leveraging the relationship for your greatest success. And then also doing the work to consider and to think about where it is in those moments in life when it hasn't gone your way, to take a step back. Review without judgment. Analyze without laying blame or guilt or shame. To appreciate what happened and what didn't happen in those moments, learn from it, grow from it, and then become potentially the right person in those other moments. Because as Rabbi Sachs says in the end of last week in an article in Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas, where what we want to do meets what needs to be done, that is where we should be. I mean, it's really that simple. And that's exactly in the nexus point of those moments when you're right for those moments. That is Coaching with the Bible for this week. Yes, I got it out on a Wednesday. I am improving. I'm getting better. Work in progress, coaching with the Bible. See you next week.